Hi and welcome back. This is the final in our series of our cook-along sessions, and this time we're going to do something a little bit different. So you've been learning about healthy lunch boxes and the kinds of things that you can put in them. We've already learned that things that we perceive as being healthy aren't always as they seem, and so today I'm going to give you some healthier options so you can swap out those unhealthy things that might be in your lunch boxes already. So we're going to have a go at making our own flapjacks and our own cereal bars, so you can replace anything that you've got like that already in your lunchbox. As always, before we start, we need to make sure that our hair is tied up, that our hands are washed, our workstations are nice and clean and tidy, and that we've got everything that we need. So let's get started. Okay, so for our lemon and sesame seed flapjacks that we're going to make today, we're going to need a few pieces of equipment. So we're going to need a grater with a small grating side. So if you've got one with a larger one, you need the smaller. It doesn't matter whether it's flat like this or a 3D one, just so long as it's got a fine grating side. You're going to need a spoon to mix all your ingredients together. A knife for when you've baked your flapjacks. You're going to need to cut them into their fingers, so that's for later. A teaspoon, so you can use a normal teaspoon, or if you've got a teaspoon measure, you can use that. It's absolutely fine. A board to work on, some greaseproof paper. That's going to go inside your baking tray. So you want a baking tray that's about 18 centimetres, so not very big. If you haven't got one that size, then use whatever you've got. If you haven't got a square one or a rectangle one, use a round one and you can cut it up into pizza shaped slices. Whatever you've got at home will work. You're going to need a bowl to mix your ingredients in. We're going to actually do some cooking today, so you are going to need your saucepan, and you are also going to need some weighing scales so that you can weigh out all of your ingredients. So these are an old-fashioned pair that I use. If you've got electronic ones, that's absolutely fine. Whatever you've got at home, so long as you can measure out the right ingredients. So once you've got all your equipment ready, you're going to need to make sure you've got all the right ingredients. So you're going to need some unsalted butter, and you're going to need 100 grams. Now don't worry about remembering all the measurements of your ingredients today, because there is a recipe card on the website that goes alongside this cook-along session, and everything you need will be listed on there. So don't worry too much. I have left my butter out so that it's not solid and so that it's not cold, so it's at room temperature. And then I've also chopped it up into cubes using our different cutting techniques and grips, because when we come to melt that in our saucepan, that will melt a little bit quicker. So we've got our butter. We're going to need 100 grams of clear honey. So I've measured this out into a bowl, but if you're using a squeezy bottle of honey and you want to squeeze it straight in, then you can do. You're going to need 175 grams of porridge oats. So that's going to be the main bulk of our flapjack. You're going to need 50 grams of sesame seeds, because we're going to add that with our lemon. And speaking of lemon, you're going to need the zest of 2 lemons. So I've already zested one. We're going to zest one together today, and you can see how we do that. And then I'm going to add it to the one that I've already done. And then we're just going to need a little tiny pinch of salt when we come to put everything together. So the first thing you're going to need to do is switch on your oven. So you're going to need to preheat your oven to about 180 degrees. So that's the first thing we need to do. Once your oven's on, then we can get started. So the second thing we're going to need to do is prepare our tin. So you're going to need to get your tin, and you're going to need to get your baking greaseproof paper, and we put this in our tin so that it doesn't stick. So when we come to take it out after it's baked, it comes out nice and cleanly, and it's not all stuck to the edges. So what you want to do is just roll out some paper, and then you're going to take your tin, turn it upside down and place it on top. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to hit that edge, and then we can get rid of the rest of that paper so we don't need any more. Okay, and then we've got that there. Now if you want to, you can use a pair of scissors and you can cut it and you can make it all nice, but at the end of the day this isn't going to be kept and you're just going to throw it away. So once we've got enough paper, then we're going to push that into our tin like this. Now it will lift out, it won't stay, so a little tip here is to just get a little bit of your butter and just rub it into the bottom of your tin, and then that will act like a little bit of glue, so then we can just stick that in there and then that's not going to lift out. If you want to trim all those edges, then you can do so with a pair of scissors. Just cut those off if they're just getting in the way. Like I say, it doesn't have to be especially neat because it won't make a lot of difference to how your flapjacks taste. Okay, so now we've lined our tin, we can put that all to one side because we're not going to need that until we have mixed all our ingredients together. So we're going to need our bowl and our spoon to do that. Okay, so what we need to do is in our saucepan, we're going to need to put some of our ingredients, and in our bowl we're going to need to put all of our dry ingredients. Okay, so in our bowl we are going to put our porridge oats. So let's put those in there. Okay, and then we're going to put our sesame seeds in with those as well. And it's easier to mix these together before we start heating things up. Right, so we've mixed all those dry ingredients together, and so we're just going to put those to one side where we get all of our wet ingredients ready. So when we are using our wet ingredients, we are using our butter, we are using our honey, we're going to add a little bit of salt when we put these together, so make sure you've got that handy. And we are also going to use our lemon zest. So remember, I've already zested one lemon, so we're going to do the other one together. So this is where I'm going to use my board. If you want to do it directly into a bowl, then you can do. I just thought it might be easier to show you on a board. So let's make sure you can see that. I'm going to get my grater. Like I say, I'm using a flat one, but it doesn't matter what type of grater you've got. So we're going to just zest off, so we're going to grate off just the edge of our lemon. So make sure you've given it a nice good wash and a clean before we started. And then you're just going to grate that onto the board. So you can start to see that lighter yellow come through from inside. And you're just going to keep moving your lemon around until you've got all of that edge off. So really simple to do. There are some specialised zesting tools you can buy out there, but they don't do anything different, so you don't need anything specialised. Just use your grater. Just be careful of your knuckles and your fingers. So we can start to see that that zest is coming out the back and it's going onto my board. And then I'm just going to keep moving it around until I've done. And then instead of throwing the lemon away, because we've only used the zest, you could use the lemon to juice inside and put it in your fruit salad from our Eat the Rainbow sessions, or you could slice up your lemon and put it into some water and create some natural flavoured water, which would be quite nice, especially with the summer and the warm weather. That's nice and refreshing. You could add some cucumber to that and a little bit of mint, and that'll be a really nice, refreshing drink. So you can see I'm just continuing to rotate that round until I've got it all off. So we want to use as much of that lovely zest as possible. That then also reduces down on our food waste. So if we're doing several different bits of cooking at the same time, we then can utilise the whole of the fruit rather than just parts or sections depending on our recipe or what we are doing. So we're nearly there we go. We're all done with that. And then I've got a nice pile there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my teaspoon and I'm just going to scrape off any excess. And put that in there. And then I'm just going to gather that up on this board and then just tip it in with the rest of it. So that's why if you've got a good bowl and you want to do it straight into a bowl, that's absolutely fine. But it's always worth having all your ingredients ready before you start to heat things up. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to leave something and then it burns because you're trying to get your ingredients ready. So we've got our butter already, we've got our lemon zest already, and we've got our honey already. We've got our dry ingredients all mixed together over there. So now we're going to go over to our hob. Okay, so we're now at the oven. I've got my saucepan. The first thing I'm going to put in is all of my butter. So I'm going to pop that in. I'm going to let that melt. So I've got it on a medium heat. We don't want to heat it up too quickly. But as you can see, it's already starting to melt because I've chopped it up and I've left it at room temperature. So that will melt a lot quicker rather than a big lump of butter. To that butter, we're then also going to add all of our honey. Try and get as much out of there as possible. Don't worry too much if it sticks to your spoon because you're going to be using your spoon to stir all your ingredients together, but you do want to scrape it out of that bowl. There we go. So I've got my honey in there now and I've got my butter. It's melting. And then the other thing we're going to need to add is all of that lovely lemon zest that we've just done. So that's nice and fresh. So that's going to really make that smell lovely. So we're going to add that in together. Obviously, if you don't like lemon, you can give it a different flavour. You could probably use lime or you could use orange. You could experiment with different flavours. You could do lemon and lime together. So I'm just giving that a little stir around just to make sure that that butter's going to nicely melt down. And then what we're also going to need to add is a pinch of salt. So we don't want a lot of salt in there. Remember, it's one of those foods that we can have, but we don't want to have a lot of it. So our flavour is really going to come from the fact that we've put our honey in there. That's going to give it its sweetness. And then also our lemon is going to be hopefully the most dominant flavour in there, or whatever flavour you've chosen if you're not using lemon. So that's all nicely melted down, so we can see that there. What we can see is left is that lemon zest. So what we're going to need to do now it's melted is we're just going to take that off the heat so we can leave it in the pan. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our dry ingredients and we're going to add those in. So I've just turned the hob off, but I'm still going to work in my pan. So remember, this is all of our oats and also our sesame seeds. So that's also going to add another dimension of flavour to our bars. So we want to mix that all together so it's all coated, so we've not got big lumps at the bottom, because those wet ingredients are going to stick all our dry ingredients together. So everything we've used today is natural. We've used the least amount of processed foods as possible to create this. And so there's no extra bits and pieces in there that you would find in the ones that maybe are shop bought. So that's where we're going to get our healthier versions from. So that's all mixed together. You can see that's starting to mix together now. And now what we need to do is we need to get our tray. So remember that tray that we put our baking greaseproof paper in. So we're just going to spoon it out into that tray. Make sure that it is all mixed together as you're spooning, and that you've not got a big lump at the bottom. That looks fairly well mixed. Okay, let's just move our pan out of the way, and then we're just going to use the back of our spoon just to pat that down into our tray. Just make sure it's nice and even. Make sure we get to all the corners. So there's quite a lot of mixture here, which is going to make quite a thick batch. So if you're making it thicker, your portion sizes will be less. So the way you cut it up, you might cut it up into smaller sections. If you're making thinner bars, then you can afford to cut them up into bigger ones rather than the smaller ones, because there's less ingredients in there. So as you can see, I've got some bits stuck to my spoon, so I'm just going to use the back of my teaspoon that I used earlier, and I'm just going to scrape all those ingredients off so we're not wasting any, and we're using all of the things that we've put together. There we go, just make sure there's no... There we go. So that's all done, and that's ready to go into the oven. So we're going to bake that in the oven for about 15 to 20 minutes until a pale golden colour. So just keep an eye on it, set your timer for about 10 minutes, check it, and then set it again for 5 minutes and check it, because every oven cooks in a slightly different way. And then once it's cooked, we're going to leave it to cool, and then we're going to cut it into sections. So let's see how that cooks, see how that comes out of the oven later, and see what it tastes like. So while we're waiting for our flapjacks to cook, we can get going on something different. So we're going to make some granola bars, so our own cereal bars here. Now again, with our ingredients, you can switch and change depending on your own personal tastes and allergies and things like that. Obviously, if you're going to use nuts and you're going to put them in a lunchbox and take them to school, then you're going to need to check the school's policy on being able to do that. So today, our ingredients are not going to contain any nuts. We're going to use some dried fruit today. So the ingredients you're going to need is you're going to need 50 grams of unsalted butter. Again, I've cubed that down so that it makes it easier for our melting process. We're going to need 100 grams of sugar. We are going to need 150 grams of jumbo oats. So these are bigger than the oats that we used in our flapjack bar. So you find those in the breakfast aisle. We are going to use 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, 40 grams of pumpkin seeds, 40 grams of coconut, and then we've got 75 grams of dried fruit. So in my dried fruit, I am using cranberries, I'm using blueberries, and then I've also got some apricot in there as well. But again, you can use whatever you like. So you can use raisins, sultanas, You can switch them out for nuts. You could use apple sections or mashed banana instead. If you don't like cinnamon, you can change that as well. So you could use something like ginger instead of that. And then you can change your oats and you can use different oats. So if you've already used the porridge oats, as we have done in our flapjack bar, then you can use the same ones again, save you buying more ingredients. And then we've got some honey here, and we're going to use 2 spoons of honey. Okay, so again, you're going to need to preheat your oven to 180 degrees. So that's why these 2 recipes are really good to do together, because they cook at the same temperature and they use very similar ingredients. So if you've already got the ingredients for one, it's worth then looking and making the second batch. So we're going to melt our butter and our sugar and our honey together. So we'll put those to one side. So we've got our sugar and our butter and our honey, and they're all going to go into the pan. So what we want to do is we want to mix all our dry ingredients together again. So we're going to take our bowl again. I've got my coconut, so I'm just going to tip that straight in. I've got my dried fruit, I'm going to tip that straight in. My pumpkin seeds, so it's starting to look really colourful. So remember our Eat the Rainbow session. And then I've got my oats, and so I'm just going to pour those in. So I've saved some time. I've measured everything out in advance. You can measure as you go. I'm going to mix that around. Start to see all those lovely colours coming through. So we've got some green of the pumpkin seeds, the red of the cranberries, the orangey yellow of the apricot, and then that darker colour from the blueberries. It's going to really give it a bit of a tropical feel to our cereal bar. Now you can buy all your dried fruit separately, but that can work out expensive. If you like different dried fruits, you could buy it in the same bag and just use it as it comes. If you're more specific, then you can buy them all individually. Okie doke, so that's all mixed together, and then what I'm going to add in at the end, now I've mixed that, is my cinnamon, because I want to make sure that everything else was mixed together before I add that in, and then that's just going to run through it. Now if you don't want to give it that much flavour, that's fine, you can add in half a teaspoon if you would prefer, whatever is going to work for you. Okay, so got all my dry ingredients together. I've got all my wet ingredients ready to melt down. I'm just going to move that to one side, because before we start to cook, we're going to need to line our tin again. So very similar to the last tin. This one's an oblong shaped one, but you can use any shape that you like. So we're just going to roll out our greaseproof paper again, cut the tin over the top. And then we're just going to use one of our bits of butter and just use it like glue, just to stick that in. And then I'm just going to put that in my tray. Now if you leave some edges up, I'm going to trim this really long edge with my scissors again. Then when it comes to taking it out of the tray, you can use the edges just to grip it and lift it straight out. Now, unlike our other recipe, where it calls for us to cool and then cut, this one we cut while it is still hot. So make sure that you use your oven gloves to do that. Make sure you've got everything prepped and ready for when it comes out of the oven. Okie doke. So we're going to go over to the hob again, and we're going to melt everything down and start mixing all our ingredients together. Right, so we're back at our hob again here. I've got my pan on a low heat, and I'm going to start adding all of my ingredients. So I've got my butter. So I'm just going to pop that in first. and then we're going to need to add 2 teaspoons of honey. So I'm going to use my measuring teaspoon, but if you haven't got one of those, just a normal teaspoon will be fine. I'm just going to squeeze that directly in, and then I am going to tip that straight in. Little tip with this, if you put your teaspoon into some hot water before you put the honey on it, then it won't stick to the spoon, it will just glide straight on. Or you can use the back of another spoon just to get it all off there. So that's now bubbling away. And then what I'm going to do to that is I'm going to add my sugar. Now that does seem like quite a lot of sugar, but remember you're going to distribute that across all of your bars. So per bar it'll be a lot less. So I'm going to make sure that's all melted together. So at the moment you can see that I've still got lumps of butter in there and lumps of sugar. Want to melt that down so it's all one consistency and it's all well mixed. So try not to put it on too hot a heat, because otherwise you'll melt your butter too quickly and then it will just burn. So it won't blend together nicely. But just keep an eye on it and keep stirring it so it doesn't catch on the bottom of your pan. So we can see that's starting to look like a creamy consistency. We want to make sure that the oil from the butter doesn't separate out and that it all blends together. So remember, we're not boiling it, so we're not trying to caramelise that sugar. We just want to melt everything down so it becomes one consistency. So then we're going to turn our heat off, and then we're just going to add all those lovely dry ingredients that we mixed together earlier. And then we're going to give them a really good mix together to make sure it's fully blended. And that's going to make sure that everything sticks, a bit like our flapjack earlier. We don't want all of the dry ingredients on the top and our wet ingredients at the bottom. We want to make sure that's all blended through. And as that's blended through, it starts to stick together. Now, if you want to do it the other way around, if you don't feel confident doing it in your pan, that's absolutely fine. You can tip your wet ingredients into your dry. It doesn't really make any difference at all. And then once we have mixed all that up, then we're going to do exactly the same, and we're going to tip it out into our tin. So I'm going to grab our tin. I've got a tin here. Now, because we're using bigger oats, then this mix is looking more than we mixed previously. So that's why I've got a slightly bigger tin for this one. So I'm just going to take all that into there. Now this mix will be a bit drier than the last one. Don't worry, because we're going to put this in the oven and we're going to bake it for about 20 minutes. And it's going to go a light brown colour. So again, keep an eye on it, keep checking it, make sure it's not burning. And as it's cooking, all of those wet ingredients we put in will be melting down and sticking everything together. Make sure you use the back of that spoon, pat it down. Again, with your ingredients, if you're using a smaller tin and it's quite thick, then your portion size is going to be less because they'll be deeper. If it's quite a large tin and they're quite thin, then you can be a bit more generous with your cutting. Now remember, this one needs to be cut when it comes out of the oven, when it's still hot. So make sure that you've got a space to be able to transfer your tin onto and your knife ready so that you can cut that down. So we're going to put that into the oven now, and then we'll be able to take our flapjacks out and have a look at those, and then these will be ready to come out. So we'll see you in a little bit. So welcome back. Everything's just come out of the oven lovely. So we've got our lemon and poppy seed flapjack here. Remember, we can't cut that until that is fully cooled. So we're going to leave that somewhere safe in the kitchen. I'm going to let that cool down and then I'll cut that separately. So we've got our granola bar here. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut it into fingers. So I've got my knife and I'm just going to cut it into fingers like this, all the way along. Now I'm not going to take it out of the tray until it's cooled down. So I'm making sure I'm using my oven gun to hold my tray in place. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it down the middle like that so that they're half the size. And then I'm going to leave those to cool. And then I've got my own cereal granola bars. I hope you've enjoyed cooking with us today and across all 6 of our different sessions. Hopefully it's given you the confidence to be able to go forward and try more complicated recipes, but also to try new ingredients and flavours that maybe you hadn't thought of before. Good luck with all your cooking, good luck with your growing, and I hope to see you again soon.